Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video, and this is going to be my initial impressions, I suppose, very kind of early kind of review for Solo, a Star Wars story. I've literally just come back after seeing the movie, so I haven't really composed my thoughts all that much. This is really just, for the most part, just going to be my initial reactions having just left seeing it. As usual, I will split it up. The first section of the video will be non-spoilers. I'll do my best to avoid talking about any of the major plot points, and then I will have at least a small section. I don't think I'll go massively in depth on the details right now, just because I have a feeling I'm probably going to get some of the details wrong when trying to remember them in this kind of discussion video. So we'll focus primarily on kind of non-spoiler thoughts. So, overall, Solo, I went into this with very, I wouldn't say low expectations, but not really having much expectations of just I didn't really know how to feel about this. I'd watched, I think, the first two trailers that they put out, and that's about it. I really stayed away from a lot of the coverage on this, and I was kind of like, okay, look, when this comes out, I'm going to see it, because I'm interested in it, but Han Solo's never been my, most favorite character or anything like that, but I'll give it a shot, because Rogue One I thought was decent as the first kind of standalone movie. I'll give this one a shot. I came out of Solo and really liked it, and I mean really liked it. I'd say of the last, I suppose, the four kind of more recent Star Wars movies, probably The Force Awakens was the one where I initially left the cinema liking it the most, whereas Rogue One was kind of oh yeah, that was good, but you know, you could definitely tell it wasn't the most important movie, but it was solid. And then Last Jedi, of course, was this very controversial movie that you know, took a while to break down, and I think ultimately still has the fandom split. I think this was just a very kind of well-made, fun Star Wars movie, and I think it's exactly kind of what we needed after sort of the controversy, how it split the fandom in a way in two after Last Jedi, and I've kind of been in a weird spot with Star Wars in that not a lot of the new stuff that they've been announcing has kind of really got me excited, especially after Rebels came to an end, and the animated series that they're kind of announcing for next is doesn't really appeal to me all that much. This really kind of surprised me with how good it was. I thought the acting was good, the new characters I actually really kind of got behind. I was invested in it, because I had a feeling that with this movie I'd come out of it this way. This was my kind of expectations going in, that I'd be invested in the moments where they kind of show you how early Han Solo becomes the Han Solo that we know. So the moment you sort of expect this movie to cover, I think I expected I would like. I was worried about what the plot that all of that stuff would be involved in would be about. But I actually just really liked this movie start to finish. Basically, I think all of the characters I did enjoy, the connections they had between them all. The general plot that they had going on, I thought actually was quite well done. I think maybe towards the end there were elements where maybe that could have used a little bit more development, and maybe could have been introduced a bit earlier to get us invested in it. But by the end of this, I think the whole movie sort of came together in a way that I didn't quite expect it to, and it just, to me, felt like why wasn't kind of this approach in a way taken with the Last Jedi, The Force Awakens? Because it felt like here was them finding in a way returning to Star Wars, and that they've kind of, at least for the most part, I'd have to fully analyze the full movie, but it felt like they were a bit more willing to make references just with here is a species you've seen before. For some reason most of the sequel trilogy stuff has tended to avoid using the kind of species that we kind of know about. Here it felt like they were more willing to do that while still having some new things, of course. And I think it just worked on that front, in that it at the same time felt new, but also we sort of knew kind of what was going on here, because we've seen Rebels, elements of the Clone Wars and stuff like that. We know what this kind of Empire kind of era is like, and the tone of it felt kind of really good in that, just focusing, I suppose, more on the sort of crime syndicate end of things here, of like these kind of groups, like these crews kind of making these deals, these kind of criminals basically. It had a kind of slightly darker tone to the main movies, like Rogue One did, and it really worked here because it felt like we were referencing some of the kind of deeper stuff that like the Clone Wars touched upon, and stuff like that. There was at least one like incredibly surprising reveal, which I'll at least mention it in the spoiler section later on, but I was blown away by it. The fact that this even happened in this movie. I did not expect this movie to do something like that. And then just like, you know, getting to see like Corellia, this planet we've heard about for so long, and they really developed it into this place, even though we weren't there for massively long. And just, I think the main thing to get across here is just this movie was so much better than I expected it to be, and probably like is my favorite at the very least of the four newest movies, the Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rogue One, and this. I think this is the best of those four. And you know, obviously, where do you rate it among the rest of them? That's kind of obviously difficult to do right now, having only seen it once, having just come out of it, but it did impress me a lot. The other, I suppose, worry going into this is that, like, okay, we're doing a sort of like younger Han Solo. There's obviously younger Lando here as well. How are they going to do with the fact that we have to get new actors to do these characters? I thought that worked really well. Like, what's his name? Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo, I thought was really good. And like we'd heard reports like early in the production of this that like his acting on set was being like heavily criticized. I thought he came across very well as Han Solo, and I was instantly able to accept who he was. Similarly, Donald Glover as Lando, I thought was again played the role really, really well. At just kind of getting across a kind of younger, like slightly less experienced kind of Lando, but still the kind of the same sort of character. And in that sense, it worked very well in that I think this movie slots kind of effortlessly into the stuff established in the like original trilogies with these characters. And there was the worry that this movie could have been an absolute disaster. Given the production problems we heard about, there could have been huge problems with this movie. Given that, like, we know they changed like directors, and obviously I don't think we heard too much bad once like Ron Howard kind of became the director. But if he did the job that like it seems like he did of like saving this movie, turning it around, I think he deserves a lot of praise for like making this movie as good as I feel it is. And I think what's so good here is that, like, as I said, I expected to like a lot of the character moments with like how Han and Chewie met, the Falcon, how it's introduced. You get all that stuff, of course. But I liked a lot of the stuff with the newer characters, like Beckett, Woody Harrelson's character. I really liked throughout the movie. I thought his kind of arc was really good, and you were able to kind of understand his perspective and how he played this important role in sort of being a pseudo kind of mentor figure to Han, and just going through so much himself. Kira, I was kind of like, what are they going to do with her? I thought, like, by the end of this movie, like, they made a really kind of complex female character who, again, played an important role in Han's kind of story, but also has this kind of, like, story to herself. And it almost feels that, like, wait, have they set this up to, like, come back to? Like, I actually would not now mind a, like, a Solo 2 if they did a sequel to this, because I think there's enough here where you could do that, but I almost feel like, is it going to involve Solo, or is it going to be her just on her own, and what do they really do with that? That's kind of the, I suppose, the thing by the end of the movie. Like, is there enough there? like, what would they do with the sequel at the if they were to do it. But I was surprised with how they kind of left it open, and it was kind of like you kind of know where Han goes, but like with her and the how important she was to Han, the fact that she kind of, you know, gets to that point at the end of this movie, and you don't really know where she goes. It's really interesting to see. And then yeah, a lot of the other characters, like the droid character, was it L3? I again, some of the names and details are going to kind of escape me right now. But Lando's co-pilot, the droid, I thought that was kind of really cleverly done as well. Of just, you know, here's Lando's co-pilot on the Falcon, because of course we know he owned the Falcon before Han. That's something that was already established. And here's his co-pilot, and this is sort of like they do this really interesting thing of like they sort of make the Falcon itself a character, and how they do it is, I think, again, very, very clever and well done. And I think they just do the history of like Han Solo very, very good in this movie. So I think it's just definitely a 2 thumbs up from me. Like, is it absolutely like blow away amazing, like best movie of all time? Perhaps not, but I just thought it was very well done, and I think just how, I think, completely solid, in that I don't think there's too much to complain about here. Maybe some stuff will come up when I go to see it again, now that like all the surprises are out of the way, and I can maybe just analyze every scene as we go on. Maybe certain things aren't as well done as others, but I felt that I came into this movie and was just kind of like, okay, maybe some stuff towards the end could have done with a little bit more development on sort of the plot side of things. But the core of this being about like Han Solo and sort of like developing him a bit more, establishing who he was before and how he became the Han Solo that we meet in like A New Hope, that I thought was very well done. So I'll pretty much bring my, I suppose, non-spoiler kind of review to a close with that, of just like, for now, kind of like heavy praise. I really did like this. At the very least, this is a fun Star Wars movie, and I don't think there's anything overly like controversial in this. I think, you know, if you can wrap your head around a new actor playing Han Solo, if you can at least to some degree invest yourself in some of the new characters, I think you'll enjoy this movie if you haven't seen it yet and you're watching this video. So let's move into spoilers. So I'll have something on screen here to make it clear that for the rest of this video it's going to be talking about spoilers. And just be aware, I'm saying it right now, if you don't want to be spoiled in this movie, now is the time to leave. So I'll keep this relatively short, in that I'm probably going to miss out on a bunch of plot points I want to talk about. I will do another video talking more in depth about the movie in like full spoilers. Probably in a couple of days, once I've had time to like see what other people think and fully get the facts, I suppose, straight in this. So let's, I suppose, start. I won't go straight into the big one. Let's start with, I suppose, the Falcon is, I suppose, a good place. In that's obviously a really big thing that we expected. Like, okay, how does this happen? And I think it's very interesting in that there's a point in the movie where like you expect it to happen. This is where Han's going to get the Falcon. In that we get to the sabacc table, there's Lando, they're talking about his ship, they want to get the ship from him. And the plan is obviously that Han's going to play Lando and he's going to win the Falcon. They do it differently though, in that like Han is sort of like, he's building it up like he's sort of playing Lando. He has the advantage, he's playing really well. Lando's playing really well as well. It comes down to this final hand and you think Han has it, but then Lando ends up winning the hand, but they cut to a shot that shows that he was actually cheating. He has this kind of like holster thing on his wrist that has like this special card that sort of I can't really remember the full rules of sabacc, but either way, the special card that he has allows him to turn his hand into like the winning hand, and it's this kind of like 1 in a million chance of that happening. And Han sort of knows that something was up, but he doesn't see the fact that he was kind of cheated just yet. but they end up kind of involving Lando in the plot because they can't take the ship from him, so he kind of has to be involved in this himself because they still need the ship, so they have to kind of cut him in on the deal. And then as part of the plot that happens, you see Lando gets kind of injured trying to save the droid who gets kind of injured on Kessel. And so that's when Han has to actually take up the role as kind of pilot of the Falcon for the rest of the mission, and that's where the whole, Kessel Run happens, and the fact that he was the one who accomplished it is because he was in the pilot seat because Lando was injured, plus dealing with the fact that his droid was effectively kind of killed in a way. And that's what we get with the droid again. L3, I think, something 3. I can't remember what the exact letter, but it was something along those lines. And what they did was that they basically established that L3 is this kind of female voiced droid who has this personality that she's all about equality for droids, that humans should consider, like sentient species should consider droids that don't have restraining bolts to be sentient as well. And so she almost ruins the mission by causing this like mass breakout of like everyone basically, starting with the droids. And as she's sort of leading the rebellion, she's shot in the attempt of everyone to escape. And they established before this that, okay, so this is this kind of really all over the place character, but she has like the best kind of navigational database Lando's ever seen, and that's why kind of she's so valuable. And so what they do to sort of save her in a way is that they put her kind of brain module into the Falcon. And this is obviously, I suppose, retroactively, this explains why the Falcon is like this incredible ship, because we know it has like amazing ability to plot hyperspace and go, that's how kind of quick it is, that it can navigate the different space lanes quicker than anyone else because there's all these shortcuts that it can take because of the amazing navigational data. Now it sort of explains why the ship has always been so kind of cantankerous in a way of like, it's always kind of on and off as to whether it's going to do the amazing stuff we know it can do. And it's because fundamentally this droid's personality is in the ship now. So the ship and the droid are one and the same, and so it means that the ship actually sort of has a personality to it, and that's why kind of Han kind of has to be so kind of like forceful with it in a way, and like is always having to like repair it just to make it do anything. So I thought that was really well done to just add personality to the ship by sort of literally doing that, but also kind of making it so that like the kind of sentient element of like the droid is sort of gone, in that droid did die, but aspects of the personality persist in just the way the ship sort of functions. So they did a good job at that, of just like, okay, the absurdity in a way of this character is gone, but you maintain some of those elements, and I thought that was really, really well done. Definitely the Kessel Run sequences got across just how good of a pilot Han was, just obviously damaging the Falcon, like we all know from the footage that we've seen, the Lego sets and stuff like that. The Falcon that we see initially in this is like a more or less brand new, version of the ship, painted really nice. The little mandible section is filled in, it's got the escape pod. Over the course of Han flying it, it gets really badly wrecked. Not like destroyed, but like he basically uses the escape pod as a way to like get out of a situation. He's keeping them alive, but in the process is damaging the ship because he's so kind of borderline with some of his kind of escape maneuvers. And it's meant to explain why the Falcon is kind of in a way such a hunk of junk as it is later on, just kind of thrown together, because it's just barely repaired, because you find out that Han is obviously, over the course of this movie, is always willing to do the right thing. A lot of the times at the expense of getting like the full payment that maybe he would have kind of expected him to get. So it is sort of just a scrounged together ship, but he likes the personality of it, and they establish a little bit of a connection that like Han does explain that his father used to build these ships, and he was on one before, so he sort of has a connection to that model of ship. And then this one specifically, obviously he goes through this important kind of incident with. So the Falcon was really well done. Han and Chewbacca, how they meet, I thought that was actually really well done. Like, I maybe went in expecting it to be this kind of crazy, much more meaningful scene than it was, but how they went about it I thought was simple to the point, but their development into being friends and the little moments that they had where like Chewbacca could have went his own way, Han could have went his own way, but they stayed together, and by the end of the movie are the duo that we sort of know and love, was really well done. Of just Han obviously was part of the Empire, but wanted to be a pilot. He got kicked out of the academy and ended up being just a kind of ground soldier, just barely staying alive on these battlefields. Eventually he's sort of, to a degree, like outed as a traitor in a way, and fed to the beast that they've captured. And of course it ends up that in this kind of, they're in this kind of lower section, two stormtroopers are watching them from a grate, and basically the idea is that they expect Chewbacca as the beast to kill Han, who's like a prisoner. And so there's this kind of fight sequence where Chewbacca of course has the advantage over Han, but Han reveals that he speaks a little Wookiee and manages to propose the idea of an escape attempt. And the idea here is that because they had this fight before, they don't quite listen to each other, but Chewie has this moment where he does trust in Han to find a way out. Eventually, like, it's Han trying to get on board with like Beckett's group, because Beckett kind of has like infiltrated the Empire and is undercover, and eventually the two of them manage to get on board his ship and become part of their crew. And that's kind of the real starting moment for most of the plot here. Is, you know, Han and Chewie, who've literally just met, form this kind of, you know, duo and join this other crew. And then as the movie goes on, you see that, you know, they begin to make the, you know, the comments at each other that we expect. There's a key moment during the kind of Kessel Run sequence where Chewie sees other Wookiees also having been captured and wants to go save them. And it feels like Han is like not understanding why Chewie will want to go after them. He wants to focus on the mission, but in the end sort of relents a little bit, gives Chewie a weapon to help him with that, but, you know, he still has to go ahead with the mission. And the idea is that potentially this is their goodbye scene. Chewie's going off to free his people, and at this point they leave it sort of unsure as to whether Chewie will come back. But right at the end, like when Han's coming out with the coaxium, I think it is, the hyperspace fuel stuff, that they're here to get, part of the Kessel Run, he's struggling with it because it's so heavy. Chewie comes in, takes out some guards and helps him, and actually comes back for him. And there's specifically a moment later on where Chewie does stay behind to help Han, Lando and the droid and stuff like that, and leaves his people behind when he potentially could have gone with them and maybe be part of some Wookiee resistance group to free Kashyyyk, because they do sort of explain, Han kind of ends up explaining like the situation on Kashyyyk. But I thought it was just very, I think, solidly done. It obviously would be difficult to do anything like, I think, any more like emotional or meaningful, just because Chewbacca is a Wookiee, and you have to have all the scenes sort of be either put translation of Wookiee up on screen, or have Han sort of, his dialogue, say what Chewbacca is trying to say. And I think they do it well without having the scenes come across too much like, you know, the C-3PO R2-D2 scenes where like C-3PO is speaking for R2-D2 for the most part. And I thought they were well done, and just them as a duo came together, I think, really nicely in the end. So I thought that was definitely well done. The big reveal that like shocked me, in that it's not the biggest plot point in the movie for the most part, but it's the most, I think, shocking thing, and I think it's probably going to be one of the first things that people discuss, having seen this movie, is that Darth Maul is in this movie, or Maul, I suppose. He's left the Darth behind at this point. In that, it was this interesting moment there in the cinema where, like, for me, I was shocked to see him in the movie, but for a different reason than I think a lot of other people were shocked, because I could tell, like, usually, like, in Ireland, like, not many people talk really during the movies, or there's not much of a, like, vocal reaction to even a really shocking scene happening. But I could definitely hear people kind of murmuring, like, wasn't he killed and stuff like that. So it was kind of clear that, like, okay, a lot of these people maybe have watched all of the movies, but haven't seen any of the shows, read any of the books or anything like that. So they don't actually know that Maul survived the Phantom Menace. They know he was killed there as such, but they don't know that canonically he's come back since then and has been killed off since as well. Obviously this is meant to take place before the Rebels episode where he's killed again. But they basically established that this, what's it called, Crimson Dawn syndicate organization, he's in charge of it. And this is what they set up as being the overall villain, this crime syndicate which is causing chaos around the galaxy. He's the one in charge of it. And the specific scene where he's introduced is basically meant to be the quote-unquote betrayal of Kira of Han at the end. Of, like, in a way, like, the theme of this movie is sort of like loyalty, betrayal, and I suppose love/romance. And towards the end of the movie, there's these sequences where, like, okay, like, this character betrays this character, but it's a ruse. Then this character betrays this character, but, like, no, it wasn't for good. This character's actually betrayed them to gain power, and this was, like, all of this stuff, like, stacked upon each other. It was really intense, really... I liked how it was done, in that, like, suddenly putting, like, Kira in this position where, like, now suddenly she, instead of the guy she was kind of working for, was under, is sort of the main underling of Darth Maul now. And it's clear that she's done this to, like, survive, thinking that that's a better position to be in than maybe just being part of Han's crew, where it's maybe more risky and stuff like that. And she sort of sacrifices the fact that she does love Han for her, I suppose, survival, to be in a better position. And perhaps with Kira they could have used a little more bit more development on that front, but I think it had impact because it was clear that they left it in a way where, like, Kira and Han still really cared about each other at the end. And it's what made the quote-unquote betrayal, because, like, you don't really see much of Han's reaction. I think he reluctantly accepts what happens and you don't really see him react to it all that much. And that's where it's almost like, will they come back to this and resolve Han and Kira, or do we take this movie as the resolution to it? That's what's really interesting going forward, in that obviously Darth Maul is resolved by Obi-Wan in Rebels, but will they continue with getting Maul from being part of a criminal syndicate to kind of where he's introduced in Rebels? Will they cover that story? And that's what I think is going to be interesting, because I feel they almost have to do just a little bit more with Han and Kira to complete, I think, Han's kind of transition from being basically the optimistic character. He at one point in this movie literally says, I have a good feeling about this. You've probably seen that in the trailers. Versus, I think he's one of the characters who does say it in the original trilogy, that I have a bad feeling about this. And I think that's meant to definitely demonstrate the arc he goes on in this movie, from always being the person who cares about someone. Kira even at one point says, like, when he's trying to really characterize himself, I'm the outlaw. Like, he's trying to make himself like, I'm the bad guy. He wants to be the smuggler in a way. But she comes up to him and says, like, I know you more than anyone, and says, you're the good guy. And I think the movie gets that across really well, that he has this kind of good heart and fundamentally cares about nearly everyone he comes in contact with. But what this movie does is, through all these betrayals and these people that he's willing to put himself on the line for, especially, I suppose, Beckett's betrayal most of all, and the fact that he's forced to kill Beckett in the end, it's really meant to be this transition into, now he to a degree is going to take up that approach of, like Beckett, not trusting anyone. And in a way, that's the exact position that he's in A New Hope, where he meets Luke and Obi-Wan and kind of just wants to do the job and get out of it, and has this opportunity to join the rebellion, but doesn't. But eventually is drawn back in, and it's meant to be that moment of, like, the old Han coming back. And I think that's why this works so well, to add to the Han Solo story overall. So, like, again, another, I think, really well kind of done stuff, just in terms of how well this connects everything together for Han, and adds, I think, on to what the original trilogy does in those kind of early kind of character moments for Han in episode 4. So just seeing that kind of, by the end of the movie, like, he's still, I think, a bit optimistic. You can tell he's not like broken or anything like that, but definitely what he's been through, the betrayal right at the end of like knowing that Qi'ra has kind of left him behind, what happened with Beckett and all of this stuff, it's definitely put him in a bit of a different position, and it sets up that he's, you know, going to head out to Tatooine to meet with this gangster who, they don't say it, but Jabba is mentioned in this movie, but they don't specifically specify that it's Jabba who the deal is on Tatooine. But I think it's clear that maybe it's not meant to be the deal that Han is kind of running from in episode 4, but maybe it's his first dealing with Jabba, and then the situation that we're dealing with in episode 4 is like the third or fourth one or something like that takes place a few years later. Either way, good setup on that front. And now that we know that the Boba Fett movie is up next, I think maybe stuff is beginning to come together, in that I feel they could almost use the Boba Fett movie as a sequel to this. If you wanted to like use Han as like a more minor character in that movie, or maybe have Boba Fett be incorporated into how the whole Qi'ra Crimson Dawn stuff comes to an end. But I don't really know much about what they're doing with the Boba Fett movie, but yeah, the character stuff was just really well done. All those kind of betrayals, kind of fake betrayals that happened right at the end. That, and I suppose I should just comment, I thought the action in this movie was really well done. There were a couple of just really like prolonged action scenes that I thought were really good. Like, this movie, I didn't really do that many like short, quick action scenes. Instead, it just focused them on big set piece moments, and because they were kind of big and substantial moments, those action scenes felt really kind of unique and cool. Like the scene on the kind of Magna Rail thing at the start that we saw in the trailer a bit was actually really cool to see in person. Like the escape scene as they're getting away, I thought like it's actually pretty good, like well choreographed in terms of where everyone is and so on. What else? I suppose the main plot of this movie kind of mainly revolving around the kind of hyperfuel, the coaxium, and you know the need to get this because it's like the most valuable thing for most of these kind of gangsters in all of this. That the initial score with Beckett is to try and steal a kind of train cart filled with this stuff, refined version of the stuff, and then to make up for that being destroyed in the first sequence, the aim is that the Kessel Run is going to Kessel to get unrefined version of coaxium. But the thing with unrefined coaxium is that after a certain amount of time it becomes unstable and explodes. So the whole plot point of like the Kessel Run and why it's a record is that theoretically it's not possible to navigate back from Kessel to the nearest refining facility in enough time so that it doesn't explode. And that's why doing the run in, what is it, like 12 parsecs is actually such a cool record, because it's the big plot point here of getting that amazing navigation route and flying the Kessel Run in less time without it kind of exploding. I think in a way the weakest plot point is probably Enfys Nest. I think just how they introduce this character, and like they're there and thereabouts throughout most of the movie, created as this big threat, and it seems like they're the villain, but they end up being the sort of like the rebellion connection to this movie, and that by the end we find out that this girl who, like, they sort of say that like she's taken on the mantle of this role from her mother, is going to use, because Han ultimately ends up giving the coaxium to Enfys Nest and her organization, which is effectively the rebellion, and she offers him, after seeing how good of a deed he's done, the chance to join the rebellion, but he says no, and you get this kind of nice little moment where she says, like, maybe someday you'll decide to become involved in it, and he's just kind of like, I don't think so, and it's meant to be this kind of wink at the audience of like, you all know when he does. So I thought that was well done. but it felt like we were almost like missing a scene where they were talking to her, and she just maybe explained a little bit more about like herself and like specifically what their group was and how it was connected to the rebellion. Maybe it was just some dialogue I'm not remembering, or maybe like kind of missed out because it was focused on other stuff. But that was the one bit that felt just a little underdeveloped. It'd be my like only like critique really of the movie, of just like, it's this kind of big reveal of like, oh, this kind of crazy like strong Enfys Nest character is actually just this kind of like teenage kind of young adult character who's much younger than like we expect her to be, and she's kind of a kind of pseudo leader of this kind of rebellion group. They roughly say that, like, you know, that they're here to protect this kind of town from Crimson Dawn, of what they've done, and it's meant to be the turning of this kind of rogue group, you know, Beckett's group with Han, from working basically for Crimson Dawn to actually siding with the rebellion, and this is what kind of causes a lot of the big traitorous moves. So I think while it incorporates fairly well into it, I just felt like the specific characters in that group was just a bit underdeveloped. I'm going to end the video here because while there's other stuff to talk about for sure, I suppose I sort of should have covered this earlier on. How Han actually gets the Falcon is that in the end, after all of this, like, Lando just ends up like leaving in the middle of some of these confrontations happening. Like before Enfys Nest is like properly revealed, Lando's obviously just back in the ship. He just kind of like takes off and leaves without telling anyone. And then Han ends up, after all of that is settled down, he ends up tracking Lando down, and they have another sabacc game, except this time where they sort of like have their kind of handshake hug kind of moment. Han notices the kind of cheating device on his wrist and ends up actually like secretly stealing the card that he would use to win the game. And they basically have a kind of rerun of what happened before, except this time Han wins, and he wins by just playing it straight. He doesn't use the card that he stole. He actually points it out right at the end, like, here's the card that would have won you the game, but I've won without even using it myself. And that's how he wins the Falcon in the end. Overall, I really, really liked Solo. So that's my initial thoughts, and we'll have another video in a couple of days, probably towards the end of next week, once I've had more time to compose exactly what I want to say about it. But very positive initial thoughts on Solo. But if you've seen the movie, let me know how you felt about it and how you feel about what I've had to say here. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.